All right. Tim gave me a hard time last time for the countdown
That is
music.
not true, Trip. I said I loved the countdown music last time. Okay,
Are you feeling angelic?
I was like, ooh, welcome to the late night with Tim Whitaker and Trip Fuller and Aizaiah Yong. That's why I felt like that was the vibe I got. With that like
Oh,
real just sultry kind of chill music, the background. It's ready to chill.
oh, hell yeah. That's what I'm
Which
talking about.
maybe fits today's theme of the contemplative tradition and that kind of
Well,
stuff. I was never a part of in my life.
well, Isaiah has quite the story that he shared quite a bit of it on last time he was on the podcast and in the lecture. And like there are some charismatics and former charismatics, Isaiah, that had questions that I only mildly understood, like the charismatic in connection to how they did Christian nationalism stuff. And I'm like, oh, Tim can come up with a way of asking that in clarity. But what someone was like, has he ever had gold dust come down from the ceiling? And
Oh
I'm
my
like,
god!
what is that? Like, is that a real question or is this a joke?
No, that's a problem. It's probably half and half. I mean, Bill Johnson from Bethel, they claim to have gold dust manifest or gold teeth manifest in people's mouths.
Oh, gold teeth.
It's a whole thing, man. It's a whole thing.
Oddly enough, I was like thinking, is Gold Dust the wrestler a charismatic? And like, was it one of those Easter specials, and like Gold Dust ascends, and he's like, "I'm coming from the streets of gold. Time to ask Jesus in your heart."
It's just so funny where both of our minds go. I'm like, oh yeah, I get that right away. Like Bethel, and you're like wrestling. Yeah. Well, aren't you jealous you didn't grow up in the world I did and inhabited all this?
I missed out.
I
missed out.
You really did, man.
We just got purity culture without any of the excitement and good technology.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Isaiah, we're glad you're here.
Right. On that note,
I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much, Trip and Tim. It's a real joy to be with y'all today. Appreciate it.
So when you hear Gold Dust, do you think Bethel or wrestler?
A little bit of both, to be honest. First, I did think the wrestler, and then as Tim was sharing, I said, "Oh yeah, that's what's being referred to here." So actually, I was never a wrestling fan, but I did know the name Gold Dust. So I'm appreciating connecting to both of what y'all said.
Can I tell you both a funny story now about Gold Dust and my experience with it? This is a true story. So I was part of some worship. I used to be a professional drummer, and I did a lot of drumming in the worship space, including the more charismatic space. And I went to someone's like church revival thing. I was drumming for it. And at the end of it, this guy who really meant well comes over to me and is like, yo, check your hands. There could be gold dust like on your hands. And I look and my hands are glistening. He's like, look, that's the gold dust. I'm like, wow. And then I realized it was just the sweat of my palms from drumming for 2.5 hours that he was looking at. And it was one of those moments for me, even as an evangelical, where I was like, yeah, I think we're just trying to find excuses to claim divine miracles, when in reality, my hands were just really sweaty. That's all the glistening was. It wasn't actual gold dust. So that's my experience with that world.
Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome.
I'm sure you were playing well to have hands that sweaty.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Oh man. I'm just sad no one sent a question in about how sweaty Tim's hands get when drumming.
Yeah.
But we do have a bunch of questions. And by the way, all of you that sent them in, thank you. I've attempted to shorten them and organize them. And Isaiah and Tim, y'all have the list. So if you can always put in our chat if there's a specific one you want to get to, that's fine. But if you're jumping on here and saying, whoa, this was a fun conversation, what lecture was it that Isaiah gave that you're talking about? Then you can go to faithandpolitics.net and you can sign up. You'll get access to a whole bunch of lectures and other Q&As and stuff we've done, and come have a fun time with us. And Tim, did you know that Isaiah's coming to Theology Beer Camp this year?
Oh, you are? Oh, great. Oh, that's going to be awesome.
I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it. Y'all are coming to Minnesota, so it's right down the
Yeah.
street. So, yep, I can't wait to see y'all and be with everyone there.
It's such a good time.
It'll be my first time, my first experience. So.
Oh, you're going to love it. My wife is coming for the first time too, so she's really excited. So it's going to be great.
Awesome. Well, all right. So I want to do one. We got one question here that I think will give Aizaiah a chance to set up some of the framing and contrasts that were in the talk. And here we go. We'll do this one first. This is from Robert, who asked, how do you reconcile this contemplative approach of justice with Jesus' more direct confrontations of religious and political authorities in the gospel? And feel free to give, some more framing stuff for people that are just joining now but haven't heard the whole lecture.
Sure. Yeah, well, again, thanks for this opportunity. Happy to be with y'all. It was great to see some of the questions coming in from the lecture. Appreciating everybody who's been engaging in this course. For me, a contemplative posture in the Christian tradition really has to do with living one's life most fully. Like, simply put, it's living one's life most fully. And so a contemplative posture is about welcoming in the suffering of life. It's about welcoming in the love in life, the joy in life, the despair at times that we feel in life. So it's really a holistic way to be engaged with one's life. And so in that sense, there's clearly going to be a gamut of expressions into the fullness of life, but also ways to support life to life. And that's, to me, what the contemplative invitation is to discern in each moment by moment, what would be skillful, compassionate, engaged response to what we're seeing. And sometimes that for sure means confrontation. Sometimes that for sure means, our boundaries that we set, resisting cruelty and pride and arrogance, right? And being able to disrupt those patterns in ourselves. I think part of the contemplative invitation historically within Christianity, as we think about even the earliest folks, right, who were kind of having to flee the Roman Empire and find themselves in deserts and really wanting to reconnect to this experience of the divine that was being co-opted by the powers that be. That was its own kind of confrontation. And as they were meeting with folks that would go find them in the deserts, or as they were engaged in different places, it was a real alternative a real alternative invitation of living out one's faith. And so in that sense, I see them as very complementary. The kind of polarity people often talk about is contemplation and action, right? But they're really one and the same. I mean, the point is to bring them together so that every action you're done in a contemplative way, whether that's protest, whether that's writing, whether that's sipping a beverage, whether that's spending time with your children, or all the different activities we do, right? To be there for it. I'll just say this other piece. I've been learning about Kung Fu because I have 4 children, and my second child just got a white belt. So that was pretty cool to see. And one of the things with this child, loves to do Kung Fu with kind of brute force, and just wants to experience his body, kind of try things out. And so the teacher's constantly telling him, you are strong, but actually you don't need to use all your strength to actually complete what we're asking you to do. You could actually use less strength. Like, it's not as hard as you're making it, basically. And if you learn how to connect to your own body in a grounded sense, you can actually spend less energy and have an even greater impact, or have the impact you're looking for. And I share that story just to say, I was like, okay, this is a teaching, right, that I could learn, because so often we want to use the same strength or energy that we might see as a way of thinking that that's how we can actually change the situation. But what does it look like to actually have composure and have a clarity of what you're doing? And that's what I see in Jesus's confrontation in the Gospels of being very direct, right? So it's not a kind of passive, kind of like whatever happens, that's fine. I mean, it's a real clear prophetic action that's done with a kind of connectedness to oneself, one's tradition, and not on just behalf of others, but really the world, right? And so that's the contemplative, I think, invitation to how we act and move, and so it's an ongoing journey and exploration, discernment. So hopefully that gives some initial frames, but I guess the response is to see them in connection to one another, and to be available in one's life to act in lots of different ways. I mean, it depends on the situation and context. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I really found your talk incredibly provocative because in a good way, because it really seems to be a countercultural approach to almost everything. Like I thought a lot about, and I'm a full-time creator. I mean, I do content creation for a living. So part of my job is to be talking about things as they happen, breaking news, hot takes right away, Substack posts, podcasts, whatever. And it seems like what you're arguing for is a pause and reflect and discern and then approach something, a very different way than social media and kind of like our nonstop news cycle. I'm just kind of curious because I didn't see this question come up. I was kind of surprised, like how you look at the contemplative tradition and how it fits into a system that seems completely bent in the opposite direction. That's right. Where the hotter the take, the more viral you're going to go, the quicker you're able to get on something, the more likes you're going to get. That kind of approach. It just seems like they're really at odds with each other. But I must say, and maybe it's because I live in New Jersey. It's a very high paced, culture out here. There's something that is very beautiful. And I was like, it kind of draws me to what you're talking about, where I'm like, yeah, I would love to have more of that in my life than what I do 24/7,
Yeah, that's so, honestly, it resonates so much. Like I've grown up mostly in metro areas across the United States, lived in 9 different states, most recently lived in the greater LA area. And so I know exactly the kind of feeling you're talking about in connection to, not as a content creator, so not in that sense. I mean, that's a different world than I swim in. But in terms of just the pace of folks and, working hard and wanting to, keep up in a certain sense with the demands of culture and society. I mean, even for ministers or academics watching, right, which you might think of whatever people think of in those contexts, there's still a lot of demands from the people, from other powers that be, from the guild, right, so on and so forth, publish or perish, right, that can create that sort of energy in terms of how we move. And I think, to be very transparent, I do think that's one of the ways that empires and oppressive systems thrive, right? They thrive on keeping us going in frenetic pacing. And so part of the strategy is to create unclarity in people and outsource the spiritual wisdom they already have inside their lived experience to follow a trend of the propaganda machines and, honestly, to make money for others, right? Because the harder you work, the more that we all succumb to this, like it's profiting certain people to do that, right? Our lives become extracted to gain more wealth. I don't want to just put economic frames on it. I mean, I think those are real implications, but I think what I'll say now is that one of the things I've been learning now that I've moved out of that area and I'm working at a monastery in central Minnesota, it's like I think I shared about it in some of the lecture, at least the podcast, but it's something that I've been continuing to learn from and learn about for these monks who take these vows of stability, right? The Benedictines take this vow, not just to a way of life, but to an actual place. Like they vow to live and work, pray and work, and study in one place for the rest of their life. A vow of stability. I mean, it's so much a vow to stability, to the fact that if the monastery closed for whatever reason, they would no longer be vowed, because their vow is to a place. And if that place is no longer a place, they are free to do something else, or they can join another community. And why I'm saying this is because that vow of stability, I mean, and I've been like really like thinking about this, because it's so countercultural to how I've lived, to the people that I talk to, even out in a more rural environment, and just making that stability part of your spiritual practice. Now it makes sense why the monastic communities were cultural hubs of survival and renewal when things happened in society and things started crumbling. The monastic communities helped to re-educate, feed people, right? And be a place where there was a sense of that groundedness. And so all that to say, like, and I'll end here, this part is to say that, like, the rhythm of life that is cultivated here is very intentional. And I think part of the wisdom for the human family that's like this monastic community, and I would imagine others as well from other traditions can offer us, is that sense of intentionality of the rhythm of our day. And how do we approach our day with a rhythm? We're going to have demands. There's going to be unexpected stuff that happens. There's going to be, right? We have to be open to that. And at the same time, I think the through line we're trying to carry is how are we continuing to have that flow of the interiority with our action, right? The contemplation and the movement. And so it's not necessarily, it is a pause, but it's like we're developing these muscles. And to your point, there's very few places that are integrating this yet in religious context, education context, business context, and so on and so forth. And so I think we have a big invitation of like, how would we begin to do that? And so I could say more about those threads, but that's just an initial response to, I think this question you're prompting is really important. And I think it's pretty rare still to find ways that we're doing that. We're working at that now, I think is a big moment.
Yeah, that's helpful because honestly, I really struggle with this idea of empire and how we resist it without while being effective. And maybe the point isn't to be effective, but for me, I want to be, like it's not just about, well, I resisted empire. It's about like, well, how do we help dismantle the parts of empire that need to be dismantled? How do we find things like affordable healthcare or gun control, right? And so I always struggle because I don't just want to say I've done something for the sake of doing it. I want to find ways to have like tangible outcomes to hopefully change society for the better. But your answer is really helpful, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So one of the things around that point that comes to mind is there's something else going on. I think that the place in that the brothers make a commitment to a place. They also have a commitment to a rhythm, right?
Yeah, that's
of the day, of the church year. And I think
right.
one of the things that came to my mind in relation to Tim's question and your lecture is that our cultural moment now is one where there's like this constant acceleration going on.
Yeah.
And it leads us to relate to the world with a kind of instantaneous fascination. And then we go to the next thing, right? And as opposed to what happens when you have these commitments to place and to an alternative rhythm and practices, you're cultivating not so much like a drive of acceleration, but kind of the wisdom of attentiveness. And that attentiveness actually allows you to not be fascinated by the immediate, but to contemplate it and take more intentionality in actions and in words and what you don't say and don't do, right? Which is rarely something really Protestants not saying and not doing was just not a part of early Protestantism in this. And then the moment it connects with our economic system and our technological moves, it just kind of like we've been dialing up that Protestant work ethic while we've like deflated the moral foundation of it to get to a place where we all feel like our finitude's being sucked out of us by a system we can't opt out of.
Exactly.
Right. And I think that's why so many people resonated with your lecture. And, I just started reading Diana's new book that comes out at the beginning of November because we're going to do a bit with her about the new book at camp. And she makes an observation that resonated with yours where she goes, look, the calendar most of us live on, the Western calendar, is one that has like capitalism, imperialism, extractive logic, demands for growth, like all of these things that are just entailed that if we just live on this calendar, we've no longer asked questions of deep values. In the church and other religious traditions as well have alternative calendars. It's a different way of relating to time, and it's a different way of orienting oneself to space. Watching your lecture again before this, after reading the first part of her new book, and then Tim's question, I was like, yeah. And it made even more sense, I think, for us to have you a part of this, that if we're thinking about the God of justice, why is it the big wisdom traditions, including all three of the monotheistic ones, like insist that thinking about how we attend to the world, our attentiveness, and cultivating practices of contemplation seems so foreign to the drive of acceleration and fascination at the heart of our contemporary culture?
Exactly. No, that's exactly right. And it seems like in one way we need those traditions more than ever, and yet they're harder and harder to actually practice at the same time, right? Like I'm listening to your lecture, Aizaiah, and I'm like, this is great. And I'm thinking, how would I ever implement this stuff in my life that just feels like it's nonstop? Not even just on a news cycle. I mean, even as of this recording, there's a news story that there was a mass shooting at an ICE facility. I mean, okay, that's a whole other thing now that we're all going to be focusing on, right? On top of just normal life, paying the bills, family, husband, all that other stuff. But at the same time, I'm like, it almost feels like my soul is thirstier than ever for what you're talking about, where I'm like, oh, that sounds like that could be the way to like a more sustainable path that is more inclusive of my neighbors and more self-reflective and not just giving into the hot take cultures that we're living in. So it's a real interesting paradox because I think it's needed more than ever, but also maybe arguably more difficult than ever to implement in society, given where we are and the technological advances that we're dealing with. Having these devices on our person at all time that feed us a fire hose of all kind of either news or propaganda. Our algorithms are now mediating our relationships. Like there's a lot of layers to unpack to kind of get to this tradition that I think is so needed.
Yeah, no, I'm really moved by what you're both sharing and the honesty by which you're sharing it, because what's coming up for me, Trip, when you were talking about this fascination, this instantaneous, right? And then, Tim, you're talking about how in this moment in particular, how not only does it kind of just keep going and just keep getting faster, right? I mean, that's kind of the nature of it all. What was coming up for me is like contemplation. And again, contemplation and action together, like I'm saying contemplation, but I'm saying like how we live. That is maybe a different layer or depth of fascination of the soul, where that's what really radiates creative, in some ways, even a new response, right? Because I'm thinking about AI, and I'm thinking about how, it's like AI can tell us a lot about a lot of things. And as it keeps getting more information, like the different AIs that are out there, I'm imagining they're going to probably start saying similar kinds of things as they start getting information and processing it. Like if you ask it one question, the AI might talk in a very similar way because it's getting these outputs, right? And so it's kind of bringing the information together and trying to give you the best answer, whatever that means in that sense. But what you would do, and I think it was Rick Rubin who was talking about this, but he's like, if you gave the same script to 5 directors, you'd have 5 different movies. Right. Because AI can't really do that part. And it's like, and I think that's contemplation. That's what you are now experiencing, the uniqueness of you, not the individual you, the uniqueness of you in a way that no other being ever or before or ever will experience again. And so to live it most fully, that's a contribution to reality that forever changes it. And it might not be an instantaneous fascination, but it's something that you can feel, and you can feel in your experience. Like the music, you feel great music when you hear great music. Great music is when someone's paid attention. You talked about attentiveness, Trip, and so it's not just a repeat, right? We hear the songs that are the repeat songs, and we're like, okay, right? Like, but then you hear a song that's unique, right? That brought something in and put it together in a new sense. It's both the harvesting of the tradition and the creative act together in that person. That's what it really fascinates in that deep sense. And so I think it's a different layer. Like we get fascinated by new information, by whatever. It's like, well, I think there's a soul fascination that we need to be invited. And then the last thing I was just going to respond and say, like, how do we do this? Well, I think part of also for me what different rhythms or practices offer, and I think I was clear in the talk, but I want to echo it again, that I'm not really advocating for, when I say contemplative tradition, I say traditions or contemplative spiritualities, because I'm really not trying to advocate for one contemplative way even, because I think part of what we're invited to is really to learn from this dimension of many traditions. But one of the things that I think they do have in common kind of universally, contemplative invitations across traditions, is this sense of being in relationship and being supported by a larger body of relations. so that when we're showing up for our lives, it's not just on us. Like we're able to kind of breathe out and recognize that there's a greater relational support and engagement and wisdom that is unfolding, right? That's all part of our experience. And so now I'm sounding all like the process folks, right? Maybe in a way, but
indoors.
But I think that's but see, like, it's one thing to hear about it, it's another thing to experience it,
right?
And to experience it every day and every moment, right? And I think that's part of then what informs a different response. Is like, I'm not on my own, like we're doing this together, and I'm not even quite sure of all the direction, but I'm feeling into the experience with life. And so I'll pause it there, but I think that's a big antidote to some of the other forces. They don't want us to feel support. They don't want us to feel like we're in this together. They want us to feel like it's all up to each one of us individually, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big change, right?
It's really helpful.
You know, I mean, even that bit there, it reminds me of JC himself, John Cobb, who really like resonated. Like he was sitting there in his book Abba, talking about how Christians actually have managed to relate to God in such a deist way with some ethics on it for much of mainline Protestantism. And then evangelicals find like the few places God really cares, and it tends not to be the ones Jesus was rather obsessed with, right? Like economic systems, perverse structures of power, those kind of things. And yet when Jesus talks to his disciples, he answers very few questions without a parable. And one of them is, how do you pray? And then he begins and he says, well, our Father. Or like, and there's a kind of orientation to the world that is he called the structure of Christian existence, which is unique to that tradition, just like there's different wisdoms that are unique to other traditions. And you talk about the kind of learning from others as well in your lecture. But one of the lines that he had that really resonated with what you were just saying there is he goes, the temptation of economism, which was, he said, the one true global religion that everyone synchronizes to without admitting that they're multi-religious, it's instilled in us in that drive of acceleration, a way in which we're always being driven by this other. And this other is a demand that comes to us if something is lacking in us and we're deficient, and it wants to name the deficiency or name where you're not being, you're not being efficient here. You're not succeeding enough. You got to do more. You got to be better. And you're being driven by this other. And the face of the other that Jesus was trying to invite his disciples to see is Abba, the deeply loving parent, the motherly father, the fatherly mother. And that's one that seizes you. It seizes you like a parent picking up a kid, because it knows winning in that moment is beholding you with deep love. And there's nothing that happened in that moment when you're being pulled to the face of your parent. You're being seized by them, because the greatest gift you can have is really just receiving what's there. And when you can do that, then you can pray for your enemies. You can not count when you forgive. You can kenotic practice with your ways and influence and privilege. You can do all these things. And he's kind of pointing out in that book, and it resonated so much, especially with your process riff on what you said in your lecture, like there is a different kind of orientation that the contemplative life invites us into. But it's one where, like, so many of the deficiencies that drive our current world are revealed as myths, as idols. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts the contemplative tradition had to give us in this moment, where we are constantly fascinated by the brokenness and injustice and harm and shame that is just blowing up all over the place. To let us know that the truth about us and about our neighbor and our enemy is so much deeper than what fascinates us in the moment. But to see it involves being seen or being seized by being held by the belovedness of God.
Well, I think we can go home now.
Yeah. Or we can answer another question. It's only been 30 minutes.
Oh, sorry. We're gonna do our second question. Tim wants to do this one.
Well, can I just say in response? I really I'm really appreciative of JC himself, both of them, but John Cobb, in that invitation, and particularly, you know, that it's a sort of radical act to continue to find yourself beheld by this loving presence every moment, you know, in every day. I mean, I'll just speak for myself. I mean, I think there's a certain kind of willingness one has to make available to let that come forth. And like you said, we're so conditioned in so many different ways, and also harmful theologies, which we don't need to go down that route, to talk about how it entrenches us into thinking about prayer or whatever devotional acts like that we might bring, it's thinking it's going to make us feel how bad we are still, right? It's like, and so, but actually getting into this experience where we can experience a belonging, a sense of belovedness as we are right in this moment, like this breath, right? Being the home for the fact that the divine somehow is gifting us, saying like, you right now, right here, like this is an invitation to experience this connection. And so there's a lot of unlearning and letting go of things that we're going to have to, you know, like Thurman talks about, inside each person is the inward sea, and on the inward sea there is an altar, and there at the altar, guarding the altar, is the angel with the flaming sword, the angel with the flaming sword, right? And it's like, the only way to be with that altar within, that true living experience, is to let go of, right? And that's the hard part, right? Both why the monastic traditions are so difficult, but also just interiorly the hard part, like to let go of all the ways that we cling to, wanting to have something that we can stand on, that we can control, that we can predetermine, that actually though is the obstacle that prevents us from being truly held in that experience. And so, so again, this is a unique invitation for all of us to kind of find our way into. But I do think what the tradition helps us to do is to tell stories, and using the words of their time to be able to say how they've kind of stumbled into this experience, which for me is then this hope of like, okay, there's moments I feel it, or there's a lot of moments I don't. It's that sense of like, well, they felt that too on the journey of letting this open up. And so I just wanted to kind of like not only talk about how important that is, but also just say like it's a kind of a very courageous I think experience too, really. I mean, so
yeah. All right, Tim, you want to do the question you suggested 20 minutes
ago?
ago?
I'm so biased because I grew up Calvinist, like American Calvinist. So I did think I like question number 3 that David brought up. How does your emphasis on inner transformation relate to the Reformed understanding of total depravity and the need for external grace? I do like this one because for my ex-evangelical friends out there, many of us grew up with this idea that we are just totally wicked and depraved. But there is a legitimate, robust theology of total depravity that I think does get to the heart of the fact that like humans do bad things. Like there is something that's a part of us that like wants to, do things that are not helpful overall, except for maybe benefiting ourselves. So, this idea of inner transformation as it relates to that understanding of total depravity and the need for, the grace of Christ, something like that. How do these two ideas dance together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you for that question. Not speaking as someone who's been too steeped in the Reformed spaces that some others have been, but definitely in my own way, being in spaces where it's like the starting place is like God is good and you're bad, basically. Right?
Exactly.
And so that's kind of, and then once you get that, once you accept that, now you can have grace and Jesus and da-da-da. Well, for me, I think that part of when I think about new births, right? Because let's talk about birth for a second. And this is just my personal experience. And so we'll see how it lands or not with this question. But, and I'm pulling on Thurman again, because he would say that the most dramatic answer to life that reveals the kind of everlasting quality of it, and I'm paraphrasing his quote, I'm probably not doing it justice, but he talks about the birth of a new life being this kind of eruption of love, of a response to all the hard, harsh, very difficult things like life is birth. And I got this quote from someone when our third child was born, and for me personally, experiencing that at 4 children, like looking at my children personally, like I see this belovedness in this being. And it's not based on the fact that whatever they're going to do or not do in their choices. I see this kind of primordial, of course I'm biased, it's my kid, but I'm seeing a kind of, almost, and I think it's the Sufi tradition to talk about like how kids even are closer to the divine than us because that's where they came from. But it's that sense of like that right there, this preciousness, and they're so vulnerable, right? These kids aren't doing nothing. They're not offering anything. They're literally more work than anything. But like, it's the sense of this eruption of some divine presence. So one thing I think about that as kind of where a starting place is. Now, sin and this sense that we can be caught in many cycles and perpetuate many harmful things throughout our lives. I mean, that also tracks and resonates both on a personal level and what we see. And so it's like, for me, what we were kind of just talking about feels like a bridge, because it's that reminder that we're known, we're seen, we're held in this sense holistically. That helps to transform how we relate to those tender places in ourselves, the disturbing places in ourselves, the troubling places. And I think, again, continues to give us courage to reenact different possibilities. And so for me, this inner transformation is about returning to this place where our experience finds support. I know Tripp and I talked about my own encounter with this in my podcast, like, with my own suffering and like having difficulty knowing how to be with that I felt kind of distanced me from this presence, but experiencing this presence in a way that knew how to compassionately connect to it. And through that connection, like transform how I saw it and transform even continuously how I can engage with it in the world. I think that's part of the invitation for me. So I guess what I'm kind of saying is absolutely that this divine gift, the grace that we receive, that it's not just coming from like, I'm not making it up, I'm not willing my way to it, I'm not praying a certain thing, so now I'm resulting in it, right? This free gift of recognizing that I'm being beheld or beloved in my fullness of experience from the time of birth, and then continuing to experience that again and again throughout my life. That feels like the inner transformational journey, and feels like a difficult one at times, right? And then back to why tradition and other beings who have gone to some of these places for me are so helpful, because they're the reminders that when I feel distant or like this is an impossibility, like I have no idea what you're talking about, right? That actually is normal too.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're talking about that too. So that's a first attempt. I don't know if that resonates or if that's taken in a different direction, but I do feel the grace is very, the gift. I feel strong about that aspect. And also the sense of sin is not really the beginning of us, nor maybe our end, but is something real. And how we bring that to bear in connection to the divine presence feels really the invitation. So
yeah, that's really helpful. I had I interviewed Mako Nagasawa. He's part of the he's just a great theologian. I had him on about different atonement theories, and he really ascribes more to healing atonement, the idea that we are sick with sin and that Christ is the great healer. And honestly, that framework really helped me as someone who grew up being taught, again, by people who meant well, that I was just at my core wicked and depraved, and like I could just do nothing right apart from the grace of God. And while, again, I certainly understand how they're trying to make sense of the real evil that's in the world that humans create, I think, we're all witnessing parts of that in our own cultural context. The idea of sin being some kind of sickness, I find much more compelling, because I have found that humans are capable of good or bad, and that sometimes there are things that are going on that we just can't fully explain. And I don't think that just being totally depraved is a sufficient answer to. So I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense as we kind of think about how we deal with that part of ourselves, right? That maybe wants to, or maybe we can say we'll tolerate or even create chaos in the world for our own benefit, right? And then what do we do with that part of ourselves as we're kind of thinking about how we relate to the world, politics, each other, the planet, etc. It's really good.
Yeah. Well, I just got a phone because you said parts, and as an internal family systems practitioner, that's a really important part of my experience, is recognizing that we do have multiple parts in ourselves.
Yeah.
There's lots of different ways that people look at that in different traditions, but I think can say at the least, and I'm finishing up a piece on the many tongues of Pentecost and the many parts within, which we might be able to talk about, we don't have to, is to think about the fact that even the parts of us that can harm ourselves or others because of how they act and feel like they want to act, the drive behind that energy, like the reason that that's happening, there is some noble longing that is holy that can be invited to be transformed anew. So I can give you a real like easy example, right? Kids, I get frustrated at what they do many times.
Not me. I'm a perfect parent. I never get frustrated.
It's like, gosh, why is this happening? Like, do I not communicate? I'm a horrible communicator.
Right.
Like you know, and so I have that part where it's just like, I'm so frustrated. So it's like, I get frustrated, and then the result can be I'm shaming myself.
Yeah.
Or I can take it out on my kids, like, you're whatever, right? Mm-hmm. That's an easy response to the part that gets frustrated and gets tired of whatever's happening. Well, what's happening there for me, typically the frustration is because I want our home to be a place of safety for our family. Yeah. And when they're wreaking havoc on it, it feels like things are not as safe, right? For our home, for me. And there's many different reasons that people feel frustrated. For me, that's one of the reasons. Now, wanting your home to feel like a safe environment is a beautiful thing, actually, right? It's actually something that gives life to your family.
Right.
The problem is, like, problem might not be the right word, but what's going on there is the part wants to take matters into its own hand. It wants to fix the situation. It wants to ensure on its own terms what safety is going to look like and how we're going to get there. That's the part where when I practice a contemplative relationship to that part, I can hear its need. I can understand, listen, I'm going to affirm the fact that I do want our home to be safe.
Right.
And to be curious and to say, all right, do you have to work so hard and overdrive to ensure it? Or can we learn to experience safety in new ways? And that's where parts dialogue, connecting to self-energy, this is all IFS language. But the idea of being able to harmonize with your parts, you're not trying to get rid of them. Yeah. You're not telling them they're evil. But you're saying that there is an invitation here to return to this holy longing and to find a different expression for it that may be not only more enjoyable for me, so I'm not just frustrated all the time, but also those who are connected to me, right? That's
really helpful. You know, a couple of years ago, my brain really broke big time. I mean, like panic attacks, anxiety, it was a whole thing. And it was my first time ever really having to confront my own anxious tendencies as a young person, right? And, you know, I tried to pray, I tried to read the Bible, and that didn't seem to solve the problem. So I was forced to kind of look in other places. Long story short, one of the things that really began the turnaround for me it was really a good solid year and a half of just a constant deep sense of dread. I mean, I lost a lot of weight. Like, it was very intense. But it was interesting. The thing that really turned me around, and to be clear, I'm not a therapist, I'm not an expert, so this is just my experience, audience. You know, don't take my words as advice. Was learning to, instead of trying to resist my anxiety or trying to get rid of my anxiety, maybe becoming normal or becoming comfortable with my anxiety and welcoming it in. And that was the beginning of it really dissipating, was when I was able to acknowledge it, thank my body for trying to keep me safe, realize that this is like a fight or flight response, you know, that my body's doing its thing. And I started like talking more positively to that part and started saying, this is normal. I'm going to embrace that I might just be an anxious person. And that was the beginning, ironically, of my anxiety really dissipating. It wasn't the harder I fought it, right? The harder I tried to resist that part of me, the louder it got. It wasn't until kind of what you're talking about, where you had that internal dialogue with yourself of like, hey, anxiety is a normal part of the human experience. It actually has benefits in the right setting.
Yes.
And so maybe we can start being friends with it instead of being enemies with it. That was the beginning of really me getting back to some sense of like a normal mental health paradigm where I was able to manage it so much more, you know, effectively, frankly. So same kind of idea, you know. I think it's really powerful.
The question, I think that I can't remember who asked it, but you know, about the Reformed tradition and that sense of total depravity. I would say, one, there are some really beautiful ways of that tradition doing what it does, but is not the dominant expression that took place in much of American religion. but as someone that grew up in a Reformed context, I remember in divinity school, you, you know, that kind of internal conflict where there was like different orientations of you running around on the inside. You know, Paul's like, well, what I want to do, I don't do, and what I do, I don't want to do. Or you like, why do you think the imagery of the demonic runs through Scripture? It's because you know it's getting itself done in the person that's destroying their life, and those around them isn't all they are, and so it has to be something not right. Like they're created goodness, and I was
Right.
processing, kind of coming to terms in that early 20s with just how screwed up I was, and there were life crises going around, and my Professor Frank Tupper came over, and we're talking, and then eventually he's like, he's from Mississippi. He's like, Tripp, I need you to stop bullshitting me. And I was like, okay. And I just realized I'm like really fucked. That's what I am. And he pauses for a second and he goes, you feel better? And I'm like, what the hell? Like, this is the worst pastoral care. No wonder the guy is a theology professor. He goes, I agree. You're fucked. But first and last, you're loved, and you're loved again. And if you don't like that, you don't like the gospel. It's not personal. And like after that moment, like I was able to externalize this part of me that I just was growing to hate because I knew it was existed. But it was like voicing it. And I shared, and he goes, he would say, yeah, you're effed. But first and last, you're loved, and then loved again. And so much of that has to be it is about cultivating that contemplative orientation, or, in the liturgy, like why right after we acknowledge the grandeur and majesty and beauty of God, we confess our sins together. Is this sense that like one of the gifts of the Christian tradition is a context of grace that permits honesty about our brokenness, but also our brokenness in our life together. And that's not the breaking point for where like the God of justice and mercy just, no, we can't mess with that. It's like, oh no, well, now that we've said it, we actually get to do something about it.
Right.
You're no longer bearing the burden of managing it and covering it up and hurting it doesn't hurt your partner or your kids or your coworkers or your neighbors or the people that are being hurt by your tax dollars and all those kinds of things. Well, now that it's there, we get to attend to it. And I think that's one of that bit of like the way you've incorporated internal family systems into this contemplative and social action stuff was really powerful. And there were a couple questions about it that I think might make more sense if you just share a bit, maybe like biographically, like you come out of this charismatic tradition and then you're like digging deep in theological research and working about religious pluralism. Like, what was it? Like, what was your own kind of experience of learning about IFS and how it helped think through these challenges you were wrestling with intellectually, but then it became, this a reservoir of wisdom for you to explore?
Well, thank you both for what you shared in the personal journey and being able to give voice to some of these aspects that in our religious circles or society, right, they get put aside. And I think as someone who is Chinese, Malaysian, Mexican American, growing up in the United States in different contexts, experiencing racism, experiencing the fact that my own kind of family dynamic and upbringing very much felt like it didn't have a home or a place to connect to others. That kind of wandering set me on a journey to say, well, like, one, who am I? Kind of what does it mean to kind of show up uniquely in this way when there's really no other models I could even kind of try to copy around it? I mean, when I was introduced to Raimon Panikkar, that was one of the major draws, is that he came from a Hindu Catholic family, and he's trying to write about his experience and theologically to take both of these things into account, and how that didn't just open him up to live more fully as himself, but also to help other people see how rich their experiences were, right? Like sometimes they miss how rich their experiences are because of the ways that we structure things. And so for me, I think personally, that's part of what opened up this thread. And so when I got introduced to internal family systems at Claremont School of Theology as this way of a psycho-spiritual path therapeutic practice that took into account these multiple voices that we might bring, it just made sense to me immediately. Like, because I lived in this kind of intercultural, interracial household growing up in the United States, right? In the way that race works here. And so as just like, oh yeah, like this is helping me connect to these voices, these experiences that I didn't really have a place to make sense of or to share in a way that could be received and affirmed. And then I realized, well, internal family system. And then what I loved about internal family system is the more you can do that personally in your own way, it's going to allow you to then create a presence where others can do that. And so you're not necessarily waiting for someone to get it to live from it, if that makes sense. And it's hard, right? Because, and I think that's the ongoing challenge of both the contemplative active life is like, and it's the challenge of faith, right? In some ways, it's like you're living in connection to this reality that you're touching upon some way, and you're bringing it forth into the world, you know, with God, with others, and with the Spirit. And so it's, if you're really doing that thing, you're doing it in a way that it's not going to be fully recognized or affirmed in all that you see around you. And yet you doing it is bringing forth new possibility. And you don't always see that, right? So we think about the Hall of Faith and think about my grandparents and how their journeys have opened up so many threads for me personally, but I know for others. And so I think that whole piece is really what made looking at this multiplicity within important, and then being a Pentecostal, both in some of the more traditional senses, but then also thinking about, you know, my father's work, Amos Yong, and how he really tried to open up this question of the Spirit, discerning the Spirit's presence in other religious traditions and across the church. So that felt right in line with my own lived experience, and then also, you know, being raised in this household, but also to kind of think about the gift of Pentecost as this affirmation of kind of infinite diversity that can be distinguished, but also not separated. And so the Spirit's work is this invitation to listen and to be transformed by the diversity within us and around us continuously in ways that, you know, we don't have to own, we don't have to, right? And so that's the discernment question, but it's a beautiful opening because now we can begin to see God moving all kinds of places that we didn't expect from people we didn't anticipate. And like our life invitation is to continue to listen and be transformed through that, and continue to weave the connections in some new ways. And again, this to me feels all like my lived experience. Like, what did the Chinese, Malaysian, Mexican American, how did they come together? How did they make that work? And it wasn't easy, but it was this kind of listening to each other's cultural experience, you know, so on and so forth. And so I feel like part of that is our task now, especially I see it within, you know, Christianity, for example. We have other forms of it, nationalism, for example, that do not want to do this. They just want to take one frame and one approach other than this kind of Spirit-filled universe that helps us connect. And so I think we have an opportunity to kind of, for lack of a better term, like really write new theologies and create a new chapter within this tradition that will take us some places we might have never imagined. People might feel threatened by or, you know, unsure about. And I think, well, the Spirit kind of makes you feel that sometimes as you feel held in where you go. So
awesome. Tim, did you want to ask the question that?
Yeah, pull it up.
All right.
So I'll have it next to me. There we go. I like this one a lot. Joseph asks, are there any potential dangers in encouraging people to explore their inner multiplicity without professional therapeutic guidance? I like this question a lot because a lot of people who are trying to find maybe a better path forward in faith or whatever, you know, we're trying to do this inner work as best as we can. I think all of us have realized that at certain times we're just kind of limited.
Yeah.
And also sometimes the therapy speak gets kind of weaponized, right? So I'd just love to kind of hear your thoughts on this.
So good. Yeah, no, it's so true. You know, so I'm not a therapist too. Want to also say that. Appreciated, Tim, how you named that earlier. I am a practitioner in internal family systems, which is a therapeutic modality. I typically have used it in teaching, in seminary context, and then also spiritual direction context, which are different than therapy for sure. So I would say that the therapeutic gifts, as they help us to, in some ways, to kind of diagnose and kind of look at what we're going through in support of others who are really looking at this with a lot of others, I think is really important. I'm also saying that hearing what you mentioned, that sometimes in our therapeutic context, there can become these hierarchies, right, of what the ideal realized person looks like. Right. And one of the things I love about IFS, as I have come to understand it as I teach it, it affirms the person's inner wisdom as kind of the as what the focus is. In other words, it's very different than other therapeutic modalities where you go see a therapist and they're the ones who are professional, expert, telling you what's wrong, what needs to be treated, and what you need to change to be more whole. IFS is, no, you actually already have what you need inside. Where you might need support is in having a relational presence that can really be curious and compassionate to the wisdom that's there. So it's a different kind of facilitation and support than the kind of top down support. It's really that's where spiritual direction almost like comes a lot closer to it, because it's more of I'm a companion with you in this. Yeah, I've practiced some more ways of being compassionate and curious. Like if you're a practitioner, you're cultivating some of this stuff, but that's really the invitation. And so in other words, you're again continuing to trust this experience of people, to journey with them through that, and even to the places that it may not come together as cleanly or as nicely. You're staying present there with it to be curious and to open up a kind of support for that to be inquired upon, right, in a loving way, because you don't want to, again, part of the skillfulness in it comes in creating a loving presence. We could even say, back to what we've been kind of talking about, a sense where they can experience this for themselves through compassion, as opposed to judgment, as opposed to I'm trying to fix this. And again, I'll say as IFS practitioners, because I do some of the trainings with folks, one of the biggest edges has to go in, like the practitioner really being aware of their own movements that might want to change or judge or react to somebody else as they're sharing. And so most of the work when we train people is not a 1, 2, 3 manual. It's actually helping them get in touch with their own inner experience, to recognize where they might have blocks in really listening to someone else. And so in a spacious way. And so I hope this is helpful, but what I want to affirm is to say that, like, for sure it's helpful to have loving support when you do this work. Like, you could do it all by yourself, right, theoretically and everything, but how much more, and I don't know what comes to your mind, I think of being in my grandmother's kitchen, and when she's providing a warm meal for me and all the love she puts into it, shout out to you, Lucila, if you ever listen to this, because I feel like that's a container where I can share more of my heart. Man, it's getting me emotional, but I'm thinking about just those people, how we support each other to be real about their life and to listen to their life with a sense of wonder and affirmation and curiosity. When you do that, it will naturally transform how people see themselves and how they move, right, forward. And so I think that's what the invitation of IFS is. It's affirming that each person has this wisdom, and how might we be a sojourner with them for them to explore it, right? And so, and I'll just finish by saying, like, sometimes in IFS work, like, people don't even have to share. Like, they can literally have these conversations inside. A skilled facilitator can just prompt and ask questions like, what are you noticing? And people don't even have to share it with anyone, right? Because it's a personal exploration, right? And so you can do this work without even having to externalize what's kind of coming up. There's ways to do that too. So anyway, we don't want to go down the rabbit hole too much of IFS. There's also challenges with IFS, which we don't have time to talk about. But I do think at its core, some of the things I've lifted up are what I think are very beautiful about it, and can help us move across the supremacist ways of healing and the monocultural approaches we take, that it's this way or that way.
Yeah, the binary. That's really helpful.
So one of there were a number of questions around the way in which the contemplative connects with action. Daniel asks broad enough one. Yeah, we'll see what all gets provoked. He said, how do we balance this contemplative approach with the urgency of issues like racism, poverty, climate change that require immediate action?
I feel this.
Really, Tim? I had no idea.
No, you're right. You don't know much about me, Trip, and how action oriented I am, and just boom, 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 go, go, go.
No. Well, luckily,
That's not me at
Isaiah is
all.
going to fix it for us right now.
Yeah.
Nice,
Pull me
quick
back.
fix.
I have nothing to fix.
A nice binary. Just give me the right answer. I'll be all good.
Nope, you have it. See, now I have nothing to say after that at all. Zero. Yeah, I think we've kind of talked about it a little bit in terms of how I understand action and contemplation to go together, and how I see some of the teachings to have invited us to this. One of the images I like, and I don't think I shared it, but I often do in the teaching about some of this, it comes from Panikar, and he talks about the contemplative life, engagement in the world. And he was strange because, he saw himself as a global monk, but he was not a monk in the sense of he didn't have an order. Nobody kind of like, other than him, kind of like referred to him this way. And so, there's some questions about that. But I will say that I think what he was trying to do is open up that this monastic calling, which I think I put in the lecture, but it's really that invitation to let go of everything that is less than what is most vital. To let go of everything that is less than what is most vital. And I'm particular, I think that invitation again is unique to each person. There's no one way to talk about that, but I think it's a question that every being has to take seriously. And that's going to be part of the magic that we bring into this world. Now, with that said, like the image he would give for this, because he would say like the monastic invitation in all of us is at one time universal, and he would say in the second time it's queer. It's strange. You can't, there's no one model for it. There's no one path for it. There's no one tradition for it. And so if you're really opening to that place, you're in this question, like you can't ever name it fully. And so I love that, because it's like we all have to kind of walk our walk. But the image he would give to talk about all this would be the fish in the water. We're a fish. We're in this water, vast water. And the deep waters are kind of like wild to me. Like I've never actually like really hung out in the deep waters, right? But I mean, now I'm in Minnesota, there's all these lakes. And so I'm very curious to be in some of these deeper lakes and things. It's just like the deep, but I mean, the Great Lakes, like, deep bodies of water. It's like, what's out there? Deep bodies of water. So he talks about being in water, and he talks about the fish that is willing to swim upstream. So you've got a current going, you're moving with the stream. He says that this invitation is like swimming upstream. So it's against the grains of racism. It's against the grains of oppression. It's willing to let go of all the things that pull us back into those really violent, harmful ways of being. And so we're going against that. We're resisting it, right? But then he says, it's not just the fish that's swimming against the stream, upstream, but doing so with elegance. Now, I don't know what comes up for you when you think of elegance. I don't, it's fun. It's a funny word. The way I interpret it though, for me and why I like it, it's being able to have a sense of clarity, of connection to one's life, and experiencing the preciousness of my life. Do you know what I mean? Like really being like, okay, in this very ordinary, mundane, I'm wiping another bottom.
Right.
I'm preparing another meal. I'm sweeping this little corner, like whatever it is I'm doing, I'm taking out weeds. Like in my way, like I'm experiencing that with all my heart. That for me feels like the elegant. Like it feels like I'm in this. Like I'm experiencing. Nobody else is having this. I'm having this experience with my full self, and that's a different way to be. To bring your full self to things, and that means feeling the pain at times. That means responding very quickly when there's a disaster that you're seeing outside, right? We catastrophize. I mean, it's an interesting question with how we learn about, things and how they affect us. And, there's lots of implications for where we are in the United States and the ways that that's causing harm in the world and how we advocate and lobby. And I also think about our lived experience of how we continue to, in our organizations, like all the levels that we experience life, how we bring this kind of presence to those moments, right? And so for me, it feels like we all wear multiple hats and we have multiple ways to engage this.
Yeah.
And so it's rather, how do I change racism at large, but how do I change racism when I'm sitting at my desk? How do I change racism when I am on the protest? How do I change racism when I'm facilitating conversation, right? So I'm holding it in these different frames as opposed to, again, one path or one practice. That for me is how I hope to bring, and many times fail at doing this, a contemplative posture to the world. I think that's the heart of it, at least.
Mm-hmm. So there's one more topic we got a number of questions about that.
Okay.
I'm going to just try to set up, and then you can go wherever you want. And it's really it's not just Panikar's work, but how it kind of orients you for thinking across difference, be it difference within our own religious tradition or with other religious traditions or people that share values outside of our religious tradition. And I mean, you've shared a bit about them, but for people that are new, kind of introducing them a bit, because one of the things that that showed up in some of the longer emails that in the form of a question is a sense that the contemplative resonance, that's kind of like a form of faith. And I think our tendency as Protestants is to prioritize the particular content of our particular tradition and not be so aware as to the form it's coming in, right? So like sometimes you get a beautiful content in the form of the faith is one that doesn't actually allow it, right, to swim against the stream.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it's like you're sitting there with people and the content's correct. We're like, these are structural problems. Here's where I'm broken as a person. Here we're doing this, but we're really just being pushed by the inertia of the stream the other way with friends that complain about the same thing, and this kind of thing. And part of what I noticed in your books, in our other conversations, and in the lecture, is that Panikar has this sense of getting to the content of his faith and engaging the content of others from a space that the contemplative form, in a sense, enables. And you mentioned both of y'all have these different identities that are coming in, religious and ethnic and cultural identities. Maybe you could talk about how you've experienced him to negotiate those for yourself, to then think about these kind of traditional questions. Like, I'll just show two of them, but one, like, doesn't Panikar's fold religious identity compromise the exclusivity of Christ that many Protestants will form? Someone asked, Barbara asked, how does the framework address the tension between Christian evangelism and interfaith cooperation? Right. And those were me trying to shorten larger emails, all of which I think had this sense of, I love what he's saying. This is awesome. But also I was told the content of my faith is primary. And it seems like there's the form thing, and the form doesn't dissolve the content, but it gives a different way of relating to it.
Right. Ooh, that's good. Well, I like what you were saying about, I appreciate the thread you're trying to weave with, which I think is in some ways at the heart of this. There's kind of two things coming up for me, I'll say. The first piece has to do with the recognition, absolutely, that a contemplative invitation has to do with not so much what we do, but how we do what we do. And so again, like, and that's why some of the contemplative teachings are sometimes like weird to read, because they're doing sometimes some strange activities that wouldn't make sense to us, like things like asceticism, and it's like, what is that all about? What do you mean not instant, like get as much as I can and have what I want right now? Like, that's stupid, it's like, and so, but it's like, so, and I feel like the great spiritual writers never really give you a clear form, to be honest. It doesn't mean they didn't have one. Like, in some of the work I've been trying to do is map out, what was Panikar actually doing? And so my first book, I talk about some of the practices and methods I think he actually took for that. But I do think, like, the heart of what he's trying to say, which gets us open, right, is this question of how we're doing what we're doing. And if we're attentive to how we're doing what we're doing, it does transform the form, and you might find yourself saying complete opposite things to the same question, depending on who you're talking to, depending on the background, right? And so, like, he was so, like, against even having his talks recorded. He would have really not been happy with where we are today, because he felt like you're having a conversation with someone. you're not having an abstract universal thing. Like you are having an encounter face to face in every moment with particular beings. And the contemplative way requires you to, so even like, you know, thinking of these questions, I've been trying to think about, for better or for worse, and maybe it's for worse, is like people in my life who feel like they might be in this place, right? And so it's hard sometimes to answer abstractly. I feel like that question of how has to do with context, has to do with presence, has to do with in the moment without being pre-programmed. Again, a countercultural invitation to AI algorithms that pre-program the response, right? And again, I'm not saying I'm anti-AI at all. I mean, there are major challenges we could talk about, but the idea is saying like that's what AI can't do. We can't outsource that awareness fully. And so that's a real important thing that I think our spiritualities can nourish in us so that we can be skillful in the places we find ourselves. The second thing is, I think this is really important to say, like Panikar was not a kind of everything goes person. He was not a kind of like ultra relativist where he's just trying to bring everything into his frame. I mean, in his own way, he brings a frame because he's sharing from his personal, I think, experience. Like, honestly, I think he wrote philosophy and theology, but if you took all that language of it, he was trying to communicate through those mediums his experience. And that's why he's a true, to me, contemplative teacher. He's not communicating an idea, he's communicating his experience to you. And so, and that's also why, again, I love Jesus and some of these other teachers, because for me, here was a person who lived an experience. And how can I get to know that experience is in my own way, like what I think Jesus is really amazing and inviting us to, which is different than tell me what to believe, tell me what to do, tell me how to be. He's like, here's an experience. Now you have your experience and find out. So with those things in mind, that's important, because if you're listening to interreligious work or interfaith, you know, it's not a kind of, well, whatever goes is fine. Like, we have to be clear. Like, when there's cruelty happening, when there's violence being weaponized against people, right? I think it's not a kind of, well, that's fine. It's like, it's not fine. We could say that there's some kind of, if we're going back to the IFS thing, there's some kind of holy longing here that's totally disfigured and being put out into very wrong, you know, very, very life harming manifestations. And so we have to be clear about that, right? And so I think that's where, you know, Panikar, at least when he was wanting to take these things seriously, it's this discernment question of, and the question I would say is like, where is their fruit? This is a Christian way of framing it, but where is there evidence of transformed experience, right? And sometimes, and even that question is tricky because it's a subjective, it's personal, right? All these pieces, but it's a question of being able to notice, is this person moving and living maybe an upstream elegance in some sense? If it doesn't seem like, how do I get curious? How do I witness this experience in a way that's open to it, rather than kind of going to just judging it, othering it, saying, you know, trying to put it in some hierarchy of, well, that's nice, but it's really not the ultimate one. You know, it's like, and that's where I think part of where this gets challenging to talk about. But I think it's very clear, and at least what I've seen from Panikar is he's being open. It's not a kind of we should just merge these all and just have one new religion, right? That's universal. So it wants to really keep transforming the particularities in relationship over and over and over, right? And so, anyway.
I think that's really powerful, especially the part about, you mentioned him not wanting to be recorded, or goes kind of against the idea. And I get it, because you're different when cameras and when recordings are on, and you're different when they're off, right? And it's also, I think, about being present with the person that you're with, realizing that there's a universe inside of them, and that person has infinite worth in being, right, and dignity. And also realizing that the conversation you're having does have a context, right? It's not happening in a vacuum.
That's right.
And how in other contexts it might be perceived very differently from your original intent. And so, like, I just think about and again, as a person who does this now full time, everything is about content, right? Everything is about, okay, can this go on the internet, or we should record this, you know, that's the vibe. And certainly I think that, especially when it comes to education and fighting propaganda, there's a real strong power there of like the need to do that more and more, right? Especially to combat false narratives. But when it comes to like these hard conversations, especially with people who you might not agree with, there's something that's very different about your approach when you know this isn't about trying to convince an audience that's witnessing the conversation to your position, but you're just truly trying to understand how this person functions, and you're curious, and that lowers their guard and actually makes room for real dialogue and real progress to happen, right? As opposed to, well, I know that this is being recorded, this is going to go to YouTube, and if I lose, I'm going to look foolish and I'm going to get ratioed in my comments, and I'm going to be seen as the idiot. So I can't ever concede a point. I have to always double down, right? That's a very different outcome than having that over dinner conversation with someone that is just between you and them, that no one else ever is going to witness, hear, or even know about.
And so good. And I want to affirm that based on our social locations and the different ways our bodies get perceived in context, there's different risks to things you can say in different places, right? And I think in some ways what I'm saying is that's part of the strange kind of like co-opting of all this, where certain bodies are feeling like, right, they can't just say the supremacist things and they'd be okay, right? And so it's like, wait, I can't do that. Like now then that means I'm kind of being in this attack place. But also, I want to say that like that approach to not necessarily like seeing a person holistically and recognizing the universe inside, and recognizing that, you know, I think it's Emmanuel Larte who talks about, and I don't remember where he borrows it, but in the pastoral care paradigms, he talks about there are some that and I apologize in advance if I'm not saying this correctly, but what I remember from it I liked is he affirms that we are like some others, we are like most others, and we are like no others. Something like that. And they're all true, right? And so this recognition of like, there's different ways we connect. We're continuously in an experience. And so I feel like that's a helpful way to give us space to be curious, to not limit each other to whatever ways we can, and yet at the same time recognize that there are forces that keep wanting to limit us, keep wanting to put us into things. And they're not always, it's not always a bad way to relate to certain parts of us either, right? Go back to the parts work. And so it's like making space for the both and, but it's that curiosity. And then I'll say it's the disarmament. I think that's what you just described, which is we brought up in the lecture. It's like, that's the posture. And for Panikar, it was particularly not just the disarmament, like everybody just come and like be curious. He was talking about disarmament from the powerful forces of technocracy and colonialism and the kinds of empire building strategies that we find ourselves seduced by or continuously reenacting in small or major ways. He was saying that part of what a real dialogue would require that could bear fruit of peace and harmony together would be to unlearn those things. And so it's that letting go to really allow us to be curious. And it's not about winning, because he said victory will never bring peace. It will just create someone else who wants to beat you later. Right. And so we have to let go of that myth of victory. Yeah.
No, that's really good. I guess I can say I'm participating in the tradition you're talking about in a way, because I'm sharing from my direct experience. I mean, I go to Christian nationalist events. I've talked to these people, often, and there's a night and day difference between the internet version of them, and probably even of me, versus the over dinner conversation that we end up having. I mean, there was someone I spoke to, I'm not going to say her name, but I see her almost every year at the same event. And her and I mean, ideologically are as far apart as you can get. I mean, I think her stuff is just very dehumanizing. But I've gotten her alone for drinks. We've had great conversations and even agreed on the need for like affordable healthcare in the country. I'm like, okay, there's agreement here, right? That would never happen in the comments underneath the post, or even on a live that was being broadcast to the world, because the attitude is so different, right? And so I often personally just wrestle with the tension of the need, again, to combat false narratives and be truth tellers, and the power of the internet to do that, but also realizing that you don't really convert the person that way. You tend to actually hardline them and make them even more entrenched in their perspectives, right? And I always wrestle between the tension of both of those things, because there is an audience that is receiving propaganda consistently and is believing things that just aren't true about other people and ways of living, that's factually just inaccurate. So we have to combat that. But also the people who are pushing that stuff aren't going to be convinced by you going harder in the paint, so to speak, online. It's just not, it's not going to happen, you know?
Yeah.
Well, that's depressing. I thought we could just all vent on the internet hyperbolically while we dismiss the humanity of the other half of the country and things would get better.
I've been doing that. It hasn't been working. I'll let you know if it ever does, though.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Aizaiah.
Yeah, really great stuff.
For those who want to and haven't yet, check out his lecture. You can head to faithandpolitics.net where you can do that. You can come hang out with us soon next month at Theology Beer Camp, 2025.com. Now, Aizaiah, do you want to say something about the Collegeville Institute and what you're up to, and especially some of this, if there are ways people can connect with you on top of reading your awesome new book?
Yeah, well, thank you again. This has been a real wonderful space. The Collegeville Institute was started almost 60 years ago by a Benedictine monk named Father Killian McDonnell. And it was post-Vatican II, and one of the major hopes of the work was to bring the diversity of Christian voices together to promote not only unity, but understanding and affirmation of the life of the church. And since the last 60 years, that work has evolved significantly to not only bringing folks together from across the Christian tradition, but folks across faith traditions, to interfaith work, to those who may not identify with a particular faith tradition, but have a spiritual or moral question about how to live that out. And so, we just are firmly convicted that when we bring people together, especially unlikely conversation partners together who are genuinely open to the spiritual call they have personally with their vocational work, their projects, that new possibilities will emerge. And so we have a residential center here at the Abbey in St. John's Abbey in Collegeville, Minnesota. We have opportunities for people to come in residence and sabbatical time or short stints to work on projects and share their work with others and get feedback in a contemplative process. We have some leadership programs where people can check out and writing workshops, because communicating one's lived experience in a holistic and a kind of engaged way, right, has the ability to open up new worlds for all of us. And so we believe in that power of communication as well. So please check us out, the Collegeville Institute. Would love to hear from us. You can sign up on our website for our newsletter and hear about our offerings. And we really feel like close to the work of kind of Thurman is that experiences, meaningful and creative experiences between unlikely people can be so much more compelling than the ideologies and the hatred that often can reside in our hearts. And so that's what we're kind of up to, and look forward to getting to know more folks. So
awesome. Well, thank you. And we'll talk to you all again soon.
All right. See y'all soon.
It's not hard to find us on the internet.